Parker Hevron, political science professor at Texas Woman's University in Denton. Thank you so much and welcome to Eye on Politics.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about the hottest race in Texas and one of the hottest races nationwide, the Texas Senate race between Democrat James Talarico and Republican Ken Paxton. When you look at the last four independent polls between July 13th, 23rd and August 10th, it shows Talarico 2 percentage points ahead of Paxton, 47.8% to 45.8%. What do you make of this?
I think it's a really close race. I think both candidates right now are working really to frame um, the ways in which they're attempting to present their opponent. So you see Paxton using specific language on the campaign trail. His commercials have not been running yet. I don't think the ad buys that he's made up to this point in the campaign have approached what Talarico has done, but you see him at events using language to try and define Talarico essentially as kind of a cultural liberal who's out of touch maybe with a more kind of masculine stereotype that sometimes we think of when we think of Texas politicians. And then for his part, Talarico has been not only on the campaign trail, but using paid media in the form of commercials to go after Paxton from a kind of moral populist frame to try and hammer him on corruption and tie him to some of the things that he's gone through in his career, which the list of them has been pretty long, and thus far, Paxton seems to have been able to have kind of a Teflon coating in terms of his ability to win races. But this is a close race. It's obviously drawing a lot of national attention. It has drawn and probably will continue to draw not only a lot of attention but a lot of money, both from in Texas and outside Texas. And I think Democrats maybe are cautiously optimistic about their chances for a pickup. But as we know, Jack, it's been a long time since Democrats have won a statewide race in Texas.
And let me ask you your point about the advertising before. So obviously, Talarico's been all over TV for weeks now, spending millions of dollars each week. Texas is an expensive state to run because you got 20 media markets, and Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston are really the big ones. And it's more expensive, obviously, to run ads here. And Talarico has and Paxton has not been on the air. So how quickly do you think Paxton needs to get on TV and advertise?
It's really interesting. I mean, I watching Ken Paxton run this race as a Republican politician, right, who is running for office in a state that has been dominated by Republicans at the state level for the last 30 years. I think, and this is true whether you're talking about Democrats in California or Republicans in Texas, I think that when politicians have been in and have kind of come up through what is essentially like a one-party system, I think that sometimes they forget about reaching out to voters who might be in the kind of squishy middle of the electorate, who may be independent or who may be willing from one election to another to swing from the Democratic to the Republican Party or vice versa. And so Paxton, right now, to me at least, is running a race that he appears to have run before, which is one that at the end of the day appeals to Republican primary voters in Texas. And Texas is a Republican leaning state. Republicans have the advantage, of course, here in terms of numbers and have for a long time. And so in these races in Texas, when Republicans are able to drive that turnout in the Republican primary, that has been enough from like a political communication standpoint for them to win races. Ted Cruz came up against, I think, the limits of this approach in 2018 in his race against Beto O'Rourke, which, as you know, was very close and ended with a Cruz victory of a little bit less than 3 percentage points. But to me, right now, Paxton is his theory of the case is that if he continues to do what he has always done, which is provide red meat at his campaign rallies and his paid advertising should he decide to run ads to a large degree, that this red meat that he provides the Republican base is going to be enough to carry him to victory in November. The underlying numbers for Paxton in this race are not nearly as favorable as they have been in previous races that he's run, nor are they as favorable as they were for Ted Cruz at this point in 2018. He obviously has pretty high underlying negative perceptions around the state. But at the same time, we see on the ground, he's had recent rallies, not only in the Metroplex, but down in Central Texas and San Antonio, where lines have gone around the block, right? And they've had to shut down, allowing people into restaurants and the spaces in which he's holding these rallies because there's been too many people there. So whether that message that he's delivering is resonating beyond the Republican primary base, I think is going to be kind of the story of this campaign. And it may be, of course, that Texas being what it is, that Republican base is enough to push him to victory in November. But I think it's far from certain that that's the case. Especially, we haven't even talked about kind of national headwinds at the moment, which um, seem to be pushing up against Republican electoral success in November. You obviously have high prices, you have inflation is still really high, you have President Trump with pretty high negative approval ratings and so on.
And talk to me a little bit about, because you talked about, the Republicans, and the big question we keep hearing from Republicans that people will come back, they'll come home for the November election. And Governor Abbott's going to be advertising, Lieutenant Governor is going to be advertising. Paxton said he's going to be advertising once he raises money and receives money from Trump's super PACs, et cetera. And do you think that will be enough in this time where people are so focused on affordability?
It's a great question. And I think those of us who are watching this race are kind of looking at the calendar, like when is it going to be time to jump in, especially with paid media? We're nearing the end of August. Obviously, the election is at the beginning of November. And yeah, I don't know. It would be very interesting, and I'm sure, Jack, you've talked to people in the Talarico campaign. Because if you think about it from a Democratic perspective and strategies that they might use to win this race, it's like, okay, we can focus on converting Republicans, at least in this one election, right? Let's get some of them to cross the aisle and vote for our guy. But you actually don't need to do that, right? What you need to do, I think, at a minimum, is convince Republicans to stay home, right? Or feel uncomfortable ticking that box next to Ken Paxton's name due to the type of baggage that he carries around and that everybody seems to associate with him with. You've seen Talarico, I think, from my vantage at least, doing some things to try to appeal to maybe some of those Republican voters and get them not only to not vote for Paxton, but to cross the aisle and vote for Talarico instead. The news came out the other day that he had hired the former Cornyn staffer to serve on his campaign, and the Paxton camp immediately came out and said, "Well, we don't even know who this guy is. He's irrelevant." But I do think that these are some things that if they can break through and get to the people at home who for them, this race or really the November elections are not top of mind, right? You see yard signs on your way to work. You might see some commercials on TV or when you're watching YouTube, but you're not thinking about the twists and turns of a November race in August. But this is the time in which the groundwork is kind of laid for not only framing how you're going to talk about yourself as a candidate, but also how you're going to try and define your opponent.
And what we've seen so far in Talarico's ads on TV, at least, is him and affordability, him in a pickup truck, two pickup trucks. One I think was a Toyota Tacoma, another was a full-size Ram pickup, and the other with his grandfather on the front porch. What is that televising in your opinion?
I think he's trying to do a couple things right now in his ad. So obviously the trucks, you can never have enough trucks. You can never have enough grandpas on the front porch. So I think he's trying to signal to Texans, um, I am one of you, right? And of course, we know, the people that live here know that Texas is a very complicated place. Not everybody has a front porch, not everybody drives a truck, not everybody has a grandpa who is a former Baptist preacher. And obviously, Texans, there's more than 30 million of us, and we come in all shapes and sizes and have all sorts of different experiences. But I do think what he's trying to do there is counter a bit of this Paxton narrative that Talarico is not a masculine kind of Texas candidate. You heard him obviously talk. You heard Paxton talk about how Talarico is a vegan and calls him tofu Talarico, and Talarico responded, I've been eating barbecue since before your first indictment. So, some of these things are just patently false. But what I think the Paxton campaign is very consciously trying to do is to cast Talarico as an outsider, right? And then I think the other thing that Talarico is trying to do in his ads is um, try and tie some of Paxton's corruption, which again at this point is very well documented. He had, people in his own party voting, of course, to impeach him in the Texas legislature, but tying Paxton's corruption to some kind of populist economic policies that seem to be playing pretty well right now nationwide. So it's not just Paxton has scandals, Paxton has all of this baggage, but instead it's people like Paxton use the government to enrich themselves and their wealthy friends, while ordinary Texans can't afford healthcare and can't afford gas and can't afford groceries. And so it's really a people versus Ken Paxton kind of message that Talarico seems to be pushing. And I think that's effective. I think he really does probably need to do both of these things, which is try and cast him as somebody who has some Texas bona fides, but then also tying Paxton's own political history to the political moment that we're in right now.
Negative ads work, at least they have historically. And do you think that this is going to be, at the end of the day, scorched earth when it comes to TV ads? That, Tallarico will go on offense and point out what he's pointed out online and during his speeches, as far as, you know, calling Paxton the most corrupt politician in the US, calling him out for being on a government salary and having 15 homes worth $9 million, and just the millions of dollars that his net worth is, at least according to financial disclosure forms that Paxton himself has filled out for the US Senate, stealing or taking a pen out of the Collin County courthouse and then returning it once the owner was found. So what do you make of all that? And Paxton, the same thing. Paxton,
Yeah.
going at it, calling Talarico, Talafrico, and the fact of all of his statements about God and Christianity and his prior votes, targeting the Texas oil and gas industry. And as far as being against banning transgender surgeries for people under 18, and for banning boys and girls sports. Um, you expect all that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely live, as you know, as a politics reporter, we live in an era of scorched earth politics at the moment. And so I think in many ways what the last 10 years of uh not only elections, but just our general sort of public life in America has taught us is that really nothing is out of bounds for candidates to bring up anymore in an electoral context. And so, yeah, I think both candidates, especially as the amount of money that's being spent on both sides continues to grow, and who knows what these next few months will bring with respect to some of these other Senate races across the country. So the Texas race could become increasingly important for Republicans in terms of holding on to their power in the Senate. So yeah, I think all of that stuff is inbounds, and I think that it's the kind of things that we're likely to see when it comes to turning on TV and seeing commercials, or watching commercials online, or however it is that you consume them. That said, I also think with some of these allegations, particularly Talarico's allegations against Paxton, is it really scorched earth to call a duck a duck? I'm not sure, right? And this is what Republicans were afraid of all along with respect to Paxton serving as the candidate in this race um, is it scorched earth to bring up his record, you know? I don't know, right? And some of these things that you mentioned that are in the public domain with respect to how much real estate he's been able to invest in and all of these other things that you mentioned. This is the baggage that Republicans were afraid of. You know, you walk through DFW airport and you see people who have just landed who have those silver luggage carts and they're piled high, right? And the luggage is spilling off the top of them and you're wondering if they're going to make it out of the terminal into their car. And I think that's what Republican pollsters were afraid of. And Republican Party officials were afraid of when Paxton won this primary with Donald Trump's support, is that this baggage of his, it's not necessarily scorched earth because it's so public. I mean, he had a public impeachment trial in the Republican-dominated Texas legislature. And so, yeah, this I think the question remains, and it's an open question, is whether or not he's going to be able to overcome that in November.
I mean, his campaign has said, they'd like to think this is baked in already. People know this about Paxton. And, here we are. And so I'm wondering, do you think that Talarico needs to really just keep pushing that, to your point earlier, to keep Republicans who just can't get over it, over that hill and say, you know what, I can't.
Yeah.
Even if it means not voting for Talarico, if it means staying home. Do you think Talarico should keep pushing that, or should he be more focused on the affordability issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Talarico campaign would probably say it's not an either or proposition, right? So, um, I think their goal is kind of what I talked about earlier, which is to tie Paxton's corruption to an economic populist message, right? Which is you look at this person who's been able to personally enrich himself during his career as a government servant, as a servant to the public, and he's been able to buy all this real estate, and he's redone his kitchen, all these things that we all know about with respect to Ken Paxton. So if you can tie that, if you're the Talarico campaign, and you can tie those instances, those pieces of baggage that Paxton's dragging around to this economic populist message, I think that's what the Talarico campaign is trying to do. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether they're able to thread that needle a little bit, because I truly do not think that Paxton is a typical Republican candidate, really, even for this era of politics we're in, and even in a state like Texas, which we know has been dominated by Republicans for such a long time.
All right, we will leave it there. Parker Hevron, political science professor at Texas Woman's University in Denton. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.